today we are going to look at the areas of 3 different shapes. So we are going to look at the areas of your trapezoids, of your rhombuses, and also of your kites. So to start off, we are going to look at, okay, what is the height of a trapezoid? The height of the trapezoid is the perpendicular promise that says perpendicular. The perpendicular distance between its bases. So again, with our trapezoid here, if we look down in this area, my trapezoid I have, this is going to be my base 1, this is going to be my base 2. Typically, it really doesn't matter which one is base 1 and which one is base 2. You just have to be consistent throughout the rest of your problem when you're looking at that. But the height comes down just like with our triangle, just like with our parallelograms, it comes down and is perpendicular to that. So when we look at the area of these 3 objects, the area of a trapezoid, now you will have to write all of this out. This is not filled in your notes. It is 1/2 the product of the height and the sum of the lengths of this bases. Okay, what does that mean? So the area of my trapezoid, it says, is 1/2 the product of the height and the sum of the lengths of the bases. So product means to multiply, sum means to add. So I've got my height times, I'm going to add my 2 different bases together. So I've got my base 1 plus my base 2. So whatever that number is, you multiply that by your height, and then you take that whole thing and divide that by 2. So that is the area of a trapezoid. A rhombus then, the area of our rhombus, it says is 1/2 the product of the lengths of its diagonals. Again, you will have to also fill that out. So a rhombus, again, we have our 4 congruent sides here. I know my diagonals, those should be perpendicular. All of those properties are going to come back from that last chapter to haunt you, so be prepared. It says the area. Okay, what is the area? 1/2 the product of the lengths of its diagonal. So product, multiply, and half. I'm going to take whatever that number is, divide that by 2. So I've got my area is equal to my diagonal 1 times my diagonal 2. And whatever number that is, I'm going to take that divided by 2. Now be careful that you're looking at our diagonals. So this length here and this length here. I'm not looking at those side lengths because all those side lengths are the same. You're looking at the diagonals, multiplying those together and dividing by 2. Then we have the area of our kite is 1/2 the product of the lengths of its diagonal. So actually, it is the exact same as the area of our rhombus. Now again, how can I tell what's the difference between my rhombus and my kite? My kite, I have these 2 adjacent sides that are congruent and these 2 adjacent sides that are congruent, but these 2 here are not the same. Okay, and again, that comes down and is perpendicular. So the area of my kite is the same as the area of my rhombus, which is kind of nice. It makes it a little bit easier to remember all of them. I've got my diagonal 1 times my diagonal 2, and take that whole thing divided by 2. Okay, so at this point in time, again, I want you to pull out your pink sheet and fill out the different areas that we have just talked about. Make sure when you are labeling them that you label them with your base 1, base 2, your height with your trapezoid, and your 2 diagonals. What does that look like for your rhombus and for your kite as well? And I'm going to look for, okay, do you know that my kite, these 2 sides are congruent and these 2 sides are congruent, and with your rhombus, all 4 sides are congruent. So make sure you fill all of that in very neatly, and that should actually finish up that pink sheet for you, that little cheat sheet. All right, coming back, we have our first example here. It says the free throw lane on an international basketball court is shaped like a trapezoid. I need to find the area of the free throw lane. So for all of you basketball players out there, if you thought it was a normal rectangle, apparently for international basketball, I don't know if this is still the case or not, but it's shaped like a trapezoid. It's not your rectangle like you see in the NBA or college or even high school. So that's kind of interesting. Okay, let's go back and see. What are we trying to find here? It says find the area of the free throw lane. So I'm trying to find how much area is in this trapezoid right here. So I've got the area of my trapezoid is equal to, I'm going to write this out. I like writing it out every time. It helps me try to memorize what all these different parts are. I've got my height times my base 1 plus my base 2. Take that whole thing and divide that by 2. So I can see, okay, down here, this is, we'll say this is one of my bases, this is my other base, and my height, again, comes perpendicular. So I have all the information, I just need to fill it in correctly. So my area is equal to my height is 5.8. My base 1 is 6, plus my base 2, which is 3.6. And I take that whole thing and divide it by 2. So let's see, I've got then the area is equal to 5.8. 6 plus 3.6 is 9.6. Take that whole thing divided by 2. So we get, let's see, 5.8 times 9.6, I got 55.68 divided by 2, which then is equal to 27.84. And what units are we using here? Meters, and we're talking about area, so it should be meters squared. Okay, go ahead and flip your page over. We will go down to our next example here, example 2. Classify each figure and find its area. So classify means what kind of a figure is this? In my example A, I see that I have 2 sets of congruent sides and they are adjacent to each other, so that means that this is a kite. Okay, this is a kite. So I defined the area. You take your diagonal 1 times my diagonal 2 and take that whole thing divided by 2. So my diagonal 1, that whole distance there, I've got, again, it really doesn't matter which one you choose to be your first and which one you choose to be your second. So I've got 6 times 14 divided by 2, which is 84 divided by 2. Half of 84 is 42, and we're talking about inches squared here. All right, my next one, example B, I can see I've got 4 congruent sides, and I don't have any right angles, so it's not a square, which means this is a rhombus. I promise that does say rhombus, it's supposed to. All right, and the area for a rhombus and a kite are exactly the same. You take your 2 diagonals, multiply them together, and that should be your area. Oh, sorry, multiply them together and divide by 2. Now, with this one, you just have to be a little bit careful because it says that this distance right here is 30, and that's not my full diagonal. So if that's the case, that means that this whole thing here, my red, is actually 30 times 2, which is 60. And this whole diagonal here is not 40, but 80. So just be careful, look at your picture, make sure you're getting all of the right measurements there. So we've got our area is equal to 60 times my 80. Take that whole thing divided by 2. And as long as my calculations are correct, you can double check me on this, I've got 2,400, and we're talking about meters squared here. Okay, my next example, example 3, says one diagonal of a kite is twice as long as the other diagonal. The area of the kite is 72.25 square inches. What are the lengths of my diagonals? Okay, I don't have a picture. Draw a picture. I've got a kite. So if I have a kite, it's going to look something kind of like this a little bit where I've got my diagonals. It says one diagonal of a kite is twice as long as the other. So it would make sense if I'm going to call this red line right here, that diagonal. Now, what I like to do when I'm looking at these is I like to label it on the outside, my diagonals, so I don't have as many numbers on the inside. So I'm going to label that X. If that's X and it's saying my other diagonal here, my blue diagonal, is twice that, so that should be 2X. It didn't give us actual numbers, so I'm just going to use that. Then it says the area, that area is equal to 72.25 square inches. What are the lengths? So I need to use my formula for my kite, which again, we can look up at my example 2 for this formula. So my area is equal to diagonal 1 times diagonal 2 divided by 2. So my area, which I know is 72.25, is equal to my first diagonal, which is X, times my second one, which is 2X. Take that whole thing, divide by 2. So we simplify. 72.25 is equal to 2x squared divided by 2. I can see my 2's there are going to cancel. So I've got 72.25 is equal to x squared. So we take the square root of both of those. And again, you can double check me on this. I got 8.5. As long as I typed everything in correctly. So that's my X. Now I just have to be careful. Okay, what did they ask me? It says, what are the lengths of the diagonals? I found one of them. One of them is 8.5, and this should be inches. The other one is twice that. So I've got my one diagonal, and then my other diagonal is 8.5 times 2, which should be 17 inches. All right, moving on to example 4. Here I have my figures inside of my coordinate plane. Okay, so I need to find the area of these figures. With these, it's really nice if they end up being exactly on my lines, on my vertical and horizontal lines, so that way I can see exactly what my diagonals are. Otherwise, I'm going to have to use my distance formula to figure out what is that distance. Now this, I can look and see, okay, that and that, it looks like this is a kite. So with that being said, I want to look at my diagonals here. I've got my red diagonal and I have my blue diagonal there. So my red diagonal, I can just take that distance and I can just count how many squares I've got. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. So that is 4 units. And then my blue diagonal, I can just, again, because it lines up perfectly with those squares, I can just count how many squares I have. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So to find the area, 8 times, I'm going to add my two bases together. So 10, whoops, see if I can get this pen to work. There we go. 10 plus 14, and take that whole thing and divide it by 2. So let's see, my area should equal 8 times 10 plus 14 is 24. Take that, divide by 2. This is a 2, 24. 8 times 24, I'll write this up here, area is equal to 192 divide by 2, so my area should equal 96, and I've got feet squared. Again, you can double check me on my calculations there. All right, and that is everything. Again, you will need to make sure that you memorize all of these different formulas, because I cannot promise that you will have that cheat sheet to use on your test. You will need to know them, and you will need to know them for the next chapter as well. All of this stuff is not going away. All right, thank you.